In this video, I will offer my vision, as of now, of what I call Christ. We are the 17th of April 2022. This day is Easter, celebrated by Christians as the resurrection of Christ. And I will begin this video by talking about cultural Hegelianism, and then I will offer my vision of Christ. So, as far as I can remember, when I mentioned cultural Hegelianism for the first time, it was probably in April or May 2018. And I had only a vague idea of what cultural Hegelianism was or would be. But I imagined this ideology, for lack of a better word, as having as its purpose, the goal, the aim, was to bring about Christ consciousness by uniting, in my view, modern pop culture, the mystical teachings of Julius Evola, and the philosophy of Hegel, which would be actualized by incorporating the post-Hegelian, anti-Hegelian philosophers within itself. And as of now, I don't know who is the I or the self who had the idea of cultural Hegelianism, but we shall see eventually. And I used to define cultural Hegelianism, as I envisioned this, as being Avril, Lavigne, Evola, and Hegel. As Avril Lavigne was the embodiment of modern pop culture, but it was the whole of pop culture. And I later realized, throughout the month and the years, because it was almost 4 years ago, that the inclusion of Hegel, whether it's good old Hegel or a self-actualized version of Hegel, includes within itself the whole of being, the entire process of being becoming conscious of itself. So eventually cultural Hegelianism has to include within its own development the totality of being becoming conscious of itself. So when I, whoever the I who thought about cultural Hegelianism, developed the idea of cultural Hegelianism, I did not understand what it would mean. But here we are, and here I am, almost 4 years later, and I will try to be faithful to the original idea of what I called cultural Hegelianism, and to offer a culturally Hegelian view of what I envision to be Christ, which in my view is a spiritual principle, an idea, a transcendent principle. And this is not a view of the historical Jesus, it is a view of Christ as a principle. Any Christian anywhere in the world is allowed to offer his or her vision of Christ if he thinks that it might enable Christ to come back. But I will share my own vision. Maybe it's not the best, but it is my vision, and I will offer my vision of Christ as of now. So I will begin by proposing 3 songs from modern pop culture. The first one is by Avril Lavigne. I did not plan to include this song, but it reflects the feeling of the soul which is lost. And as of now, as I'm making this video, my soul is lost. So I will include the song Nobody's Home by Avril Lavigne to express what my soul feels like at this moment when I'm making this video. Then, two visions of what I call Christ in the realm of modern pop culture, illustrated by two songs. The first is Soldier by Eminem, and I will quote the lyrics. If Christ, as a principle, could come back and speak, maybe he would say, I'm a soldier. Those shoulders hold up so much. They won't budge. I will never fall or fold up. Even if my collarbones crush or crumble, I will never slip or stumble. Then, a second song from modern pop culture by Roy Jones, Can't Be Moved, Can't Be Touched, Can't Be Shook, came to bring life. If Christ, as a principle, as a spirit, could speak, maybe he would express himself in this song. Then, on the religious aspect, I will quote 3 books from Julius Evola to express what I think is Christ. Metaphysics of War, page 42. The greater or holy war, contrarily of the interior and intangible order. It is the war which is fought against the enemy, the barbarian, the infidel, whom everyone bears in himself, or whom everyone can see arising in himself on every occasion that he tries to subject his whole being to a spiritual law. Appearing in the forms of craving, partiality, passion, instinctuality, weakness, and inward cowardice, the enemy within the natural man must be vanquished, its resistance broken, chained and subjected to the spiritual man. The spiritual man here is what I call Christ. Page 50 of The Metaphysics of War by Evola. The consciousness of the metaphysical unreality of what one can lose or can cause another to lose, such as the ephemeral life and the mortal body, is associated with the idea that spirit, in its absoluteness and transcendence, can only appear as a destructive force towards everything which is limited and incapable of overcoming its own limited nature. Now, Evola from Revolt Against the Modern World, page 118. The greater holy war is man's struggle against the enemies he carries within. More exactly, it is the struggle of man's higher principle against everything that is merely human in him, against his inferior nature, and against chaotic impulses and all sorts of material attachments. This is my view as of now as Christ as spirit. Page 121. The consciousness of the irreality of what can be lost or caused to be lost as ephemeral life and as mortal body, the equivalent of the Islamic view that this life is just a sport and a pastime, is associated with the knowledge of that aspect of the divine according to which this aspect is an absolute power before which every conditioned existence appears as a negation. This power becomes naked and dazzled in a terrible theophany precisely in the act of destruction, in the act that negates the negation, in the whirlwind that sweeps away every finite life, either destroying it or making it arise again in a transhuman state. Christ, as I envision the principle, is this transhuman state. And now, still Evola, an extract, a quote from Meditations on the Peaks. This profound dimension of the spirit, which perceives itself as infinite, self-transcending, and beyond all manifest reality, is reawakened and shines forth, even though not entirely consciously, in the insanity of those who, in increasing numbers and without a specific reason, dare to challenge the mountain heights, led by a will that prevails over fears, exhaustion, and the primitive instincts of prudence and self-preservation. Feeling left with only one's resources, without help in a hopeless situation, clothed only in one's strength or weakness, with no one to rely upon other than one's self. After the harsh test of calling upon all one's self-discipline, the feeling of an indescribable liberation, of a solar solitude and of silence, the end of the struggle, the subjugation of fears, and the revelation of a limitless horizon. In all of this, one can truly find the real possibility of purification, of awakening, of the rebirth of something transcendent. This transcendence is what I call Christ. Now, an extract from the Exegesis of Philip K. Dick, folder 42. What each of us must do is repudiate the world, which is to say, deny it while at the same time affirming a sanctified alternate reality. This sanctified alternate reality is what I call Christ. The world can only harm the body and the mind, but not the divine spark. The divine spark that cannot be harmed or hurt by the world is what I call Christ. The mind and the body can be tormented and broken eventually, but the divine spark is Christ, in my view. Page 290 from the Exegesis. A human can evolve into Christ if Christ ignites his own self in the human and takes the human over. At this point, the man rises from time, space, and the slavery of deterministic nature mechanics, remembers all and knows himself by means of Christ as inner light. This inner light is what I call Christ. And finally, I will express what I envision to be Christ as a principle in the language of Hegel's philosophy. It's the paragraph 382 in the Encyclopedia, and Hegel, or the Encyclopedia, says, the essential feature of mind, or spirit, is liberty. Considered as this formal aspect, it may withdraw itself from everything external and from its own externality, its very existence. It can thus submit to infinite pain, the negation of its individual immediacy. In other words, it can keep itself affirmative in this negativity and possess its own identity. This is Christ as I envision this in the words of Hegel. So I have offered a culturally Hegelian view of what I call Christ as a principle, as a transcendent self, as an idea, and may those in need find Christ. That's what I have to say.